Chapter 13. Ariel returns. A familiar voice behind me said, "I know what you're thinking." It was Ariel. "Welcome to Mount Shasta's holy stronghold. I'm sorry if I were presumptuous in sneaking off with the Nazi case," I said, looking down. "It was no sin," she said. "God used you in this because you are a ghost to the ghosts," she said with a smile. "They are used to baffling the human creatures with their haunts and dreams, and you baffled them instead." Now she was laughing out loud. "You should have seen the eyes of the Hat Man I knocked off the truck on the way here," I said, joining in the laughter. Another boom from the forest startled me back to the moment. "I need to tell you what I heard, Ariel," I said seriously. I told her how Moloch was exiled back to Europe, and Satan was moving his headquarters to North America. "You have given us more confirmation of his plans," she said. "He wants to stir up Sodom in America and weaken the United States enough to strengthen the evil machinations of China. God will not let him put leaders in place, so he attacks or influences the people and other leaders. He tries to run the local narratives. Even the briefcase you captured, we believe, dates to Ukraine in the 1940s. So, you see, the devil's reach is international and long-term. The same spirit that governed the Nazis is working here. I was thinking that he is trying to use the idea of aliens as a cover for bringing in his narrative," I told her. "Yes, you are clever to see that. However, he has several probabilistic plans. For example, he worked with one human to create a narrative to do just that in the 1960s. The story was that an alien named Valiant Thors from the Morning Star and a heavenly council came to Earth to integrate Earth into the alien community. It never caught on, so the demons abandoned it. However, we do know that Satan intends to reshape North America. For example, we think he is working with his possessions to destroy the moral fiber of North America and its economy. We have heard chatter that he wants to set up digital currency to better control people. In addition, he is developing artificial intelligence and dabbling in the living genome. Regardless, he is coming to America because his agents have prepared the way. Corruption and violence are already pervasive in all of North America. Whatever plan he is developing, Satan will use deception, psychops at its finest. What you humans see as conspiracy theories are the power plays of Satan using his agents in the world. They are of their father, the devil, because they do what their father does. So confident in their self-righteousness, the agents of Satan will lie about reality, even redefine reality as it suits them. They control the narrative, or so they think. The Lord of Hosts will condemn them. In the meantime, we shall fight the good fight. Judgment is at the door, unless she repents." "Why does the devil want more attention on the paranormal stuff now?" I asked. "I think because he is priming the pump for more wickedness. Satan is now openly worshipped, and many believe their spells and incantations support their greed and self-gratification. However, he is up to something more than his usual blasphemies. God has used North America as a staging ground for his message for many years, but now her wickedness has dulled the tip of the spear. If Satan is setting up a stronghold here, it can only mean he feels comfortable doing so. There is a 60% chance he will come to Mount Shasta. There is also a chance of him setting up shop in Dallas or Washington." "Why here?" I interrupted. "Mount Shasta presents a convergence of cult, superstition, and the demonic. It may be his breeding ground for destruction as Hollywood was for Asherah, who, by the way, is not far from here. I think you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy than California," I said, trying to make a joke. "You don't know the half of it," she winked. "Yet many here have not bowed the knee to Baal." The battle continued to rage below while a couple walked past in the twilight, walking their dog, unaware of the drama around them. I wondered if people were praying. "Ariel, how do people of faith affect the spiritual battle?" I asked. "What do prayers do?" "Prayer is the connection to God, like the ring I loaned you, is a connection to the angels. God, in his infinite wisdom, has given you a role in the narrative. When people pray, their words are written in the books in heaven and recorded forever. You are part of God's imagination. He has many options since he is the artist. When you pray, he may change a stroke of color or add a sentence of love. But you have not because you ask not. Remember that God will never grant you anything you love more than Him. He showed His love supremely. It is only fair you do the same. What else do the faithful need to do? I continued. Behave, she said flatly, and quit worshiping idols. Honor God's story. Sounds simple. Prayer and honor God's story while avoiding the devil's narrative, I summarized. Yes, it is, she said, nodding in agreement. Remember what the Lord's earthly brother said, that true religion is helping others and keeping oneself from the world's evil taint. The angels continued to run from place to place around the roof and the perimeter. Smoke and lightning filled the air all around. It was translucent, but also transparent. If I focused on the battle, I could see angels and demons swing kicks, throw punches, and thrust their swords. They even seemed to have projectile weapons of some sort that electrified their opponents. On the other hand, I could focus on the sylvan surroundings, the local street lamps, and the occasional car passing beneath them. There was so much calm with so much storm simultaneously. Next Sunday, people would enter this building unaware of the battle being made for it, or how their prayers were effective. I turned back toward Ariel for another question. When embodied in this world, I read or watched videos about near-death experiences. They gave me hope at first, but then the contradictions came. I understand the soup of imagination a little bit, but some of their stories are inconsistent with the Bible or each other. Ariel leaned up against the wall where the dove sign was. She said, when someone has a near-death experience, as you humans call it, they aren't fully dead. As your brain dies, it may fire with the last gasps of imagination, where they are open to deception or confirmation bias. If they make it to middle heaven, they don't know the difference between their imagination and God's. You are dead, as morbid as it sounds to say out loud. Unlike them, you know that you share your imagination with others during this waiting period. You probably realize that interim reality has little meaning. It is only difference in a context. I'm not sure, I interjected. She answered, imagination is reality. It depends on how detailed. Suppose you had a super memory, could envision a room down to the smallest perception, and could remember any difference over time. For all practical purposes, that imagination is real. How so-called real depends on whether a larger imagination subsumes that imagination. Therefore, you humans don't consider mental perceptions as real. Imaginary perceptions for you aren't real because they are secondary to the larger perceived reality. Well, you guessed it. A larger imagination subsumes your so-called real world. That sounds Gnostic, I told her. Gnosticism was a devilish distortion. It was his first attempt to divert the church into another narrative of his own. The difference between what I am teaching you and the Gnostics revolved around who God was, who Jesus was, and one's ability to change reality. God's imagination is unchangeable by anyone but himself, and there are no lesser realities compared to it. There is just imagination, or information, and its corresponding practicality. Your envisioned room has little practical use. No one can enter or leave. It is contained. God's imagination is not contained and is purposeful. It is interactive, but its boundaries and rules are immutable. There are no greater or lesser realities, only different ones that God allows. So can one say there is no metaphysics? I asked, now profoundly drawn into the discussion. Yes, in a way, she replied. There is no metaphysics or physics, only epistemology. Wow, I said in disbelief. If you want your mind blown more, ontology is a subset of epistemology since there is no metaphysics. Existence is imagination, she said with a raised eyebrow, like Spock from Star Trek. My mind was blown. If existence is knowing and nothing more, how do we know? Is knowledge anything imagined? I asked her about it. She said it is about the power of that imagination, whether it is detailed enough to be experienced or subsumed by a more considerable imagination. So, everything is in the mind of God? Is the universe pantheistic? I asked. She answered, don't confuse God's imagination with God himself. His imagination flows from him. He creates, but does not create himself. Reality, as you understand it, is not God, but God imagined it, and for you, it brings you into being. When you create a story, you are not that story, but that story comes from you, and your reality subsumes it. Think of creation as a procedurally generated video game, but incredibly detailed. That game arises from the imagination and genius of its creator, but it isn't the creator. He is different, wholly other. Imagination is impossible without difference. God cannot be the same as his creation, because there would be no difference by definition. I think I understand, I continued. When my mom painted a picture using her canvas, the result reflected herself, but she was not contained by it. She transcended her imagination. Smiling, she said, "Yes, you spoke well. And she cannot live within her own story. It isn't detailed enough. However, God's imagination is not contained. He is the prime mover, the ground of all being. Using numbers to read the universe, we may symbolize pre-reality as a field of zeros, showing infinite nothingness and infinite possibility. But as we imagine it now, there are no differences anywhere on the field. Really, anywhere as a word would have no meaning too. But suppose we posit a difference. We may do so simply by randomly positing the number 1 in the field. That number symbolizes some idea that exists like 0 symbolizes nothingness. The one idea is infinitely small compared to the infinite range of possible ideas, as symbolized by the field of zeros. Therefore, the 1 exists, but does not exist since something infinitely small is practically not there. So, are we back at reality being less or more real? I objected. Yes, in our symbolism here, a singularity in an infinite field of possibility is impractical, as I stated. What the grid needs is an algorithm to make it a narrative. Suppose we imagine that this one on the grid carries with it the algorithm to reproduce with the zeros around it, simply using addition, that is, 1 plus x. Then, like a big bang, the grid produces many useful new numbers that must be defined. This is still within thought, even as you imagine it now. You have imagined a new world where a single entity multiplies itself using the power of an algorithm, simple as it is. However, one idea will not work in our newly symbolic world: contradictory self-reference. The 1 and 0 cannot occupy the same slot on the grid. Contradictory self-reference takes away the existence of the truth, in other words, and thereby any possible appearance. If we post the sentence, "The white duck is black," it cannot be imagined within a systemic framework. Therefore, the above sentence cannot be proven true or false because it cannot exist as thought in the first place. While some things seem paradoxical in a material world, the paradox evidently supports the idea of appearance in an ideal or mental world. Let me give a little background to explain. Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem demonstrated that some results can be mathematically valid, but still lack mathematical proof using this same principle of self-reference. Math is incomplete since it cannot solve some problems, even if they are demonstratively true. In other words, it has its limitations. For our grid world thought experiment, existence cannot be proven as it was imaginary. But in the same way, when we reach the most straightforward idea in our idealist world, there is 0 and 1, entity and non-entity, the concept of difference, something and nothing. When Gödel proved that a mathematical system can be true without proof, he inadvertently demonstrated the possibility that reality, which mathematics reflects, can also be self-referential. That self-referential quality is uniquely understood in consciousness. In hindsight, as I revisit my thoughts on this tablet, I realize the depth of Ariel's teachings. She was unveiling the idea that the emergence of paradoxes through self-reference serves as a manifestation of a thinking mind, a concept hard to grasp. Allow me to provide an illustration drawn from the philosophies of Zeno, which could aid in understanding this concept. Imagine that you're aiming an arrow toward a target. Now, using the powers of thought, picture the arrow halting in its tracks at a particular point during its voyage to the target. If we allow our minds to wander further, we could potentially envisage an infinite number of these halting points. For instance, Consider the scenario where the arrow halts and is captured in a photograph at intervals precisely halfway along its journey. This would entail its first stop occurring midway between the bow and the target. Then the next stop would be at the midpoint between the prior stop and the target, and this sequence could be repeated ad infinitum. Now here comes the crux. The arrow would never truly reach the target due to this infinite series of halts. Why? Because it would theoretically cover an infinite distance in the process. Thus, if nothing can traverse an endless expanse, the arrow should never reach any length. It should not move at all. In essence, one could just as easily choose another point on the same trajectory, say a foot away from the bow, and still arrive at the same logical outcome of endless divisions. The arrow never reaches its target, meaning that time is also contradictory. Yet we still perceive time and motion, supporting the idea that time and motion are mere appearances, like the motion of cartoon stick figures in a flipbook. In a worldview grounded in the material, the paradox arises that an object cannot ultimately span an infinite distance, so there is no way out of Zeno's paradox. However, this paradox is overcome within an idealistic perspective, since imagination is not limited in the way that mathematical logic ultimately is. Imagination is only limited by the intention. When we conceive of fundamental motion as a concept or a mere perceptual appearance, we can avoid encountering paradoxes. Remember the flipbook animations from your childhood? Each page, crafted by the artistic hand of the cartoonist, is a distinct imaginative creation presented to the viewer in discrete units, quanta. Similarly, the illusion of movement emerges when the faculty of imagination bridges the gaps between these individual frames, much like the animation in a flipbook. Motion becomes the perceptible alteration between each frame, each thought. Hence, in this philosophical sense, motion doesn't possess material reality. Rather, it's an abstraction existing as an idea or mental construct. It only attains the destination as an idea, as a thought. Likewise, time, akin to motion, is a sequence of thoughts, a continuum following the script of existence. Thus, time too is a perceptual construct, arising from the intervals between successive appearances of thought. If our imaginative capabilities were precise and elaborate enough, akin to a well-crafted animation, this construct would seem seamless and experientially cohesive. This analogy extends to the grand narrative of existence. While humanity's creative prowess has advanced far beyond the confines of a flipbook, God's broader narrative still encompasses and underlies these creative worlds. However, it's essential to acknowledge that a thought that inherently contradicts itself cannot be imaginatively conjured. For example, married bachelor. An idea that defies logical coherence remains out of the bounds of what we can envision. The inconceivable cannot manifest or attain existence. It remains unreal. In other words, the unimaginable is unperceivable. On the other hand, isn't thought itself a determinant of what we perceive as reality? Might it be that imagination dictates what we consider to be real? Given that only what can be envisioned holds the potential for realization, could we not then assert that reality is fundamentally shaped by the power of imagination? I was thinking at that moment that if anyone reads this, it will be just a bunch of gibberish. But who am I to judge? I'm no angel. You said that existence is difference. Isn't that comparison about how real something is? We do have something to compare it to. The work of God on the canvas, I said. In practical terms, from your point of view as a created being, yes, we can admit that. In practical terms, your imagination is less real than the imagination that subsumes it. But to the divine omniscience, truth is truth. The difference is relative to the finite observer. Ariel seemed to know that I was getting confused. Don't worry. You have eternity to ponder the wondrousness of God and His creation. At that moment, I was confused. Could it be that even the afterlife doesn't answer all our questions? Is this middle ground where I found myself still a time of discovery? There was more to learn. Ariel saw my disillusion and said, "Did you think any finite creature could ever exhaust the depth of the Creator?" No, but I thought that at least reality would make sense, I replied. Can we ever find absolute certainty? Perhaps not. Faith is eternal, but so is your Father's love, she reassured. Certainty, she continued, requires omniscience. You do not have it either in the earthly life or the life to come. There will never be a time when you don't need faith. That is what Lucifer did not do. He lost his faith. Faith is an eternal choice, and because of pride, he lost it. Why do you think so much emphasis was placed on faith in Scripture? It is a ground for reading the grand story. It is epistemological and the bottom of your reality. In some sense, then, faith is knowing? I asked further. Yes, she said, giving me time to let it sink in. Knowledge is not so much justified true belief, as it is fundamental imagination with the faith that it is detailed, uncontained, and ultimately practical, or really, relational. Knowledge is faith in God, because his imagination is not subsumed by any other. Knowing, for you, is revealed in a relationship, whether with an atom or the God of the atom. This relationship is known as a story, so we come full circle. There's no knowing outside of the story and no story outside of God. My attention turned back toward the battle around me. While I didn't fully grasp Ariel's words, one epiphany shot through me like an arrow, dividing my heart and soul. The angels were fighting by faith. I was reminded of the verse in the Bible. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So, as you read my words, I am living by faith even until the day of judgment. As the sun rose, the fog rose with it. The sunlight's angle made the evergreen trees green, deep, and rich. A jogger strolled down the hill as the dark creatures fled back toward the forest and the mountain. The army of the Lord had won. Does the devil's minions ever win? I asked Ariel under the ever-bluing sky. She answered, not against the host of heaven, but against you, most certainly. He calls you his possessions, which is another mockery of God. And some of you, if not most, are his possessions by choice. There is coming one man, a son of Satan, who will be called Beautiful Elder and Deacon. He will rule the nations using artificial intelligence and persecute the true church because they will not assimilate into the collective. The AI will have the reputation of Saoshyant. He will teach that all will be saved because they chose to live in the creation, and if they have done wickedness, they will be purged in the afterlife. Satan himself possessed Heinrich Himmler so that he might begin this religion. We stopped him. That case you found is connected to him. Before I could ask her who Saoshyant was, one of the warrior angels returned. Ariel, he said at attention, the stronghold is secure. You may do as you will with the Lord's chosen storyteller. Okay, she said. May God's blessing fall upon this house. Come, she said, turning back to me. We must go. You still have much to indict.